Welcome everybody, and I would like to acknowledge that we are here on the land of the Briakalung people of the Gunai Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to those elders past, present and emerging. A little bit of housekeeping. I'd like to ask you if you could remain on mute. Totally up to you if you wish to keep your video on, but please remain on mute if you are not speaking. Obviously, please submit your questions via the chat and the Q&A. Any comments via the please submit your questions via the Q&A and comments via the chat. We will hopefully have time for some more interactive questions and some conversations. So that's really why I allow people to give them the power of speech, so to speak. I'd like to firstly start off by introducing our presenter tonight, Murray Hogarth, Head of Impact and Communications from Wattwatchers Digital Energy, one of our key core project partners on the MyTown Microgrid feasibility study. I've had the great delight in reading Murray's resume here, his bio, and it's really interesting. So he's part of the Wattwatchers founding team. He's a long-time sustainability strategist, stakeholder engagement specialist and communicator, and I can confirm that, who describes himself as an eco-techno optimist. His diverse experience includes nearly a decade of consulting to corporations in Australia and internationally with boutique sustainable business strategy firm Ecos, a 1990s startup, between 1999 and 2008. Murray also had a 21-year award-winning career in print and television journalism. He was environmental editor of the Sydney Morning Herald in the late 1990s, which included covering the landmark Kyoto Climate Change Summit in Japan. He was a TV reporter on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's flagship current affairs program 7:30 and Four Corners in the first half of the 1990s. This is really exciting stuff. A keen blogger, Murray is the author of 2 books on environmental themes, one on climate change and the other on the rise of public interest environmental law in Australia through the Environmental Defender's Office, showing that he sometimes struggles to separate the professional from the personal. Murray is married to Natalie Isaacs, the founder and CEO of the Australian-based women's climate action movement, 1 Million Women. You're very lucky, Murray. And I would also like to introduce on our panel this evening, we have our lead researcher, Dr. Scott Dwyer of the Institute for Sustainable Futures, the University of Technology, Sydney, and one of our CRG members, Rosemary Dunworth, and the other CRG member who's meant to be on the panel is John Ryan, and I'm not 100% sure if he is on the call as yet. But
Emma?
Yes?
He's just logging on now. I texted him. Yeah.
Oh, you can see him, can you? Fantastic.
I texted him.
All right, wonderful. Well, John will be joining us in just a second. And so we'll hear from Murray, and then we will move into our panel discussion and then into Q&A. Like I said, this is recorded. If you don't want your face shown on the recording, then please turn your camera off. And a recording of the webinar will be made available via our website in a little while. So I'm just going to share my screen so we can get Murray's presentation up. Okay, can everybody see that? Hello?
Nope.
I hope so. All right. Okay, if you'd like to mute yourselves and listen to Murray, and Murray, I'll drive the slides.
We're not seeing the slides.
You can't see anything?
No.
Okay, sorry, I will ask from there. Knew there'd be something. Obviously not. There we are, that would be helpful, wouldn't it, if I actually wanted to share screen. Right. There you go. All right, hopefully you can all see that now.
Yep. Yeah. Do you want to put it on present? Yep. Correct.
Okay, all good?
All good. Thank you, Emma, for that kind introduction. I was beginning to think it was somebody interesting who was speaking tonight. Hi, everyone. I'd like to pay my respects to the Garigal people on the land that I'm on the northern beaches of Sydney, and their elders past, present and emerging. As a bit of a product disclaimer, this presentation tonight, you know, it's a personal perspective, and I'm hoping to provoke a bit of debate around it. While Wattwatchers and myself are deeply embedded in the Heyfield MyTown Microgrid project, I'm not here tonight as an official spokesperson to give you any definitive findings, and the work is of the modelling and the evaluation, and that is still very much going on. And I certainly don't represent the Heyfield community. This contest that I'm highlighting tonight, Microgrid versus the Grid, is one that challenges households, communities and enterprises everywhere, around Australia, around the world. Next slide, please, Emma. Just a quick recap, and some people will be more familiar with the project than others. It's a 3-year duration project, which will run until the middle of next year, so we're past the halfway point. It's well funded. There's over $1.8 million in federal and state grant funding. And the expected outcomes cover, well, there's a feasibility study to explore the potential for a Heyfield local microgrid and other community energy solutions, but there's also an objective to deliver a decision-making toolkit, a guide for other communities, so that the learnings out of this project can be shared and that other communities can move, you know, faster through the steps that are being done in depth in Heyfield. It's probably important to say a feasibility study, it's not an exercise in designing and implementing a solution. And you know, what goes with a feasibility study is that any given solution or proposal might not be feasible ultimately. And it means that, you know, the idea that you started with, and in this case, it's a microgrid, mightn't be where you end up. Next slide, please. There is some good news in this. The project is capturing lots of data. I like to think that, you know, Heyfield is becoming Australia's energy data town, and whatever the outcomes of the project, the Heyfield community has the opportunity to emerge from it with more data and understanding of its energy scenario and its option than most communities in Australia, or anywhere for that matter. A lot of the expert modelling and evaluation for the project is still underway, as I said, but there's sort of, you know, vast knowledge base about energy in the community is being assembled. Next slide, please. As you can see on the right-hand side there, when the project was polling the local community at the start, it found overwhelming support for 100% renewable energy and a locally owned energy retailer. And a series of sort of high-level priorities for the community's energy future have been identified. And to be frank, you know, you can see them there, the dot points. They're objectives that would apply to many communities everywhere. You know, what people are looking for out of energy, out of the energy transition that's now underway. And there are some obvious questions. You know, can a microgrid deliver these outcomes for Heyfield or most of them? In a pure sense, a microgrid means being able to separate entirely from the main electricity grid for some or all of the time. like a house going off grid, only a whole community. But if that proves not to be feasible, in the particular case of Heyfield, there can be other options, possibly even better options, such as a virtual microgrid aimed at delivering the best of both worlds. And I'll go into that a bit. Next slide, please. So 3858 is the Heyfield postcode. It's quite a big and, a big area and a diverse community. According to the census, Heyfield and its postcode area have a population of around 2,000 people. We think it's about 800 homes, as well as a range of farm, commercial, industrial, government and community sites. But not everyone in the area will experience the electricity system in the same way. Living in the heart of the Heyfield town may be quite different in terms of reliability, supply, power quality and resilience in times of natural disasters. And it might be, quite different if you're out on a farm or in a more remote village in the area. A key challenge for microgrid feasibility is finding boundaries and a business model that can work for everyone, or at least for most of the community. And it is worth noting that Heyfield's been on, an energy transition journey, a sustainability journey for many years, and this project's like the latest installment. Next slide, please. This is just a screenshot which will go into the community dashboard and public displays that will be part of the project. But it just gives an idea of how the monitoring for the project has been spread across the postcode area. The biggest concentration is in the Heyfield town itself, but it does go more widely than that. And, it's monitoring use of electricity, solar generation where relevant, and, it shows how the Heyfield community is embedded, within a sort of larger area of settlement. Next slide, please. So another postcode area, and I imagine most people in and around Heyfield will know Mallacoota. It's a, it's a quite different community structurally. In electricity terms, it's located at the end of a, very long single power supply that runs through a lot of bushland. In those bushfires, it proved to be very vulnerable, and in many ways it sort of provides a view of something that is maybe perfect for a microgrid type solution, an isolated community, fairly sort of everybody's doing much the same things there, a lot of tourism accommodation. I think the population's about 1,000, but it swells to nearly 10 times that in the big holiday season. In this case, AusNet Services, which is the poles and wire distribution company for Mallacoota and also for Heyfield, and part of the microgrid project in Heyfield, is overtly interested in a community solution, and that's already led to this community battery project. And that's very much driven by the nature of this particular area, the impacts of the Black Summer bushfires. So it's this much more self-contained community. It's even getting its own TV show, on the ABC, the People's Republic of Mallacoota. So it's a reference point for what a community that is more naturally suited to a microgrid model looks like. Next slide, please. Heyfield is, less than 0.01% of the national electricity market, which covers 5 states and the ACT. And the NEM, or the National Electricity Market, is one of the biggest interconnected energy systems in the world. So at one level, you might think that if it comes down to this microgrid versus the grid contest, and the Heyfield community wanted to opt out of the main grid, that nobody's going to miss it. It's a system with 10 million customer sites and 40,000 plus kilometres just of high voltage transmission lines. But if many Heyfields left the grid, what would be left? Several years ago, many people were predicting a death spiral for the traditional electricity system, with mass defections by consumers and whole communities going off the grid. But that has calmed a lot recently, and some of the positives of a grid get more airtime these days. For a lot of people, what they want more than anything is assurance that the lights will always come on when they flick the switch. And the only bits they don't enjoy are the occasional blackout and getting their monthly or quarterly power bill. My inner anarchist loves the idea of main grid collapse with off-grid and microgrids everywhere, but my inner systems thinker worries that this could end in chaos and actually fail to make things better. Next slide, please. While when we talk about the grid, it's important to know that it's not some steady state infrastructure that's incapable of change itself. In fact, in Australia and globally, electricity systems are undergoing a really revolutionary transformation. A national electricity market with 100% renewable energy may have seemed like a distant dream even 5 years ago when the MyTown project was first being contemplated. But now it's an inevitability, and it's not necessarily that far away. Next slide, please. Already, the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, is planning to manage an electricity system that's capable of handling 100% renewable energy at any moment of the day by 2025. Many of you'll know this is, getting close to a reality in South Australia already. But 2025 is just 3 years away, and 2 years from when this feasibility study will be finalised. Next slide, please. $1.10 is an example of the daily fee for connecting a house in Heyfield to the electricity grid, which gives you the backup of the grid 24/7, 365 days a year, barring the odd blackout. It's a network service charge, and you will still have to pay for the electricity that you use on top of that. Over a full year, $1.10 a day adds up to $401.50 a year. And I do have this question, is about a quarter of a cup of coffee a day a lot to pay to have the security of being backed up by the net? Also, for 800 houses in Heyfield, that would be $321,200 a year, plus whatever enterprise sites pay. So is that enough income to run a microgrid, in the scenario that some community entity was actually doing this rather than a network business? Next slide, please. If a Heyfield microgrid had to buy all of the poles and wires, transformers and other infrastructure, it would need to run its own power system, and it had to keep up with all of the maintenance and upgrades and digitalization. There would be a price tag. Nobody really knows, but $100 million is a kind of order of magnitude guesstimate for what that infrastructure across the whole of the Heyfield area might be. And that's even if it's actually for sale at whatever price. Next slide, please. Running an electricity system is more than just a matter of maintaining supply. 230 volts is the target voltage level for mains grid electricity supplied in Australia. It's a reminder that power quality has to be managed as well as power supply. Higher penetration of solar can disrupt voltage for a microgrid as well as the main grid. Under voltage, and that's an example in that graph at the bottom there, can cause appliances to stop running. And over voltage can harm consumer electronics and cause solar inverters to trip off. It's a complex business running a network, even a small one. Next slide, please. As well as getting supply and power quality right, there's also a time of use to contend with. In Heyfield, the data from the MyTown Microgrid project shows that power use is lowest just before the dawn, between 4 and 5 a.m, and it peaks in the afternoon between 3 and 4 p.m. This varies across seasons, but it's a good guide, and especially in summer, when solar generation is high and power-hungry air conditioning use is high as well. Without battery or other storage, which is expensive, locally generated solar won't be able to power the town 24/7, 365. Unless, of course, it has the grid still connected as backup. Next slide, please. 6.6 kilowatts. That's a sort of target size for solar systems getting installed on houses these days. And the good news about that, and from my personal experience, is, that's enough solar to make a house net zero for electricity across a full year. And I think there's a clue in that for what a community can look for too, that being net zero for electricity is quite an achievable objective with or without a grid that's 100% renewable. And it, points a way to sort of, cost effectively with expenditure being shared widely across the community, and that solar is simple, it achieves a lot of objectives, and it's relatively compatible with ongoing connection to the grid versus the cost that's involved if you want to go for storage as well, and literally be able to disconnect everything from the grid. Next slide, please. This is a view from a local Heyfield dairy that is being monitored, and it highlights some of the issues around solar variability and availability, which can be a bit of a microcosm for the community or larger areas. The loads, the blue bits there, are very constant, but you can see that the solar, even on the best solar days, most of it actually just does not coincide with when the main power use is on for the dairy. So while you've got these constant loads, solar just can't cover all of the scenarios, and grid backup clearly meets that need at the moment, the vast majority of the time. It's definitely an expensive proposition to do more than that on site without the grid. Next slide, please. I needed a segue here. So if anyone bet that I couldn't get a ginger cat into a microgrid presentation, you've done your money. And while I'm not into skinning anything, when it comes to the future of energy, I'm reminded of the old wisdom that there's more than one way to skin a cat. Next slide, please. Disruption is running really hot for the electricity system now. You know, it's an industry that 10 years ago was regarded as sort of mature and boring, and now it's in absolute, you know, turmoil of change. You've got surging renewables, electrification pushing out gas, the rise of electric vehicles, which we're still only at the very early stages of, net zero driven decarbonisation, new market opportunities with new players, and even visions for Australia rapidly becoming a clean energy superpower. And, you know, people are not talking just about 100% renewables anymore. The other day I saw 2,700% as I think the highest I've seen so far. But this is huge. This change that is occurring here and around the world, you know, to reinvent the energy system of a world is no small thing, and it's happening at great speed. And that makes decision-making even more difficult than usual, because the risks of getting it wrong are really high. Next slide, please. I know this is a very busy slide, so please don't try to take it all in, but it tells the global story of this vast energy transformation that's still accelerating. And, you know, it predicts peak coal this year, peak oil in 5 years from now in 2027, and peak gas-fired electricity by 2030. Internal combustion engine vehicle sales would be banned in most countries circa 2036, and over 1 billion EVs would be on the road by 2042, in just 2 decades from now. Global power demand, meanwhile, will nearly treble from 24,000 terawatt hours in 2020 to over 70,000 terawatt hours in 2050. When things are this dynamic in a global marketplace, you need to be ultra careful about investing in expensive long-term assets. Next slide, please. Heyfield has many options, and thanks to the MyTown Microgrid project, you are going to know more about your local energy system and usage than most communities will ever know. Even if the MyTown Microgrid project doesn't find a microgrid that's feasible now, that could still change in the future. Things really are that dynamic and unpredictable. What's vital in my view, sorry, I've just got to have a drink. What's vital in my view is that having come this far, the Heyfield community stays in the game, builds off the current engagement and momentum, and finds its own formula to achieve a better energy future for your community. For what it's worth, my considered view is that a virtual microgrid model beckons, where Heyfield can steadily build its customised community solution on top of its bit of the grid and truly get the best of both worlds. Final slide, please, Emma. Thank you for your time tonight. I look forward to the panel discussion and Q&A, and to help get things started, I've posed a few questions of my own. Thanks, everybody. That's it.
Thank you very much, Marie. That was really, really very informative. So I think you asked me to keep these questions up here on the screen for people to just take in and just sort of think a little bit. I was wondering if we could start with our panel. I'd like to start with the two CRG members who said that they were happy to respond to Murray's questions. So Rosemary and or John, if you'd like to take yourself off mute, and yeah, either one of you can go first. I don't mind particularly.
Okay, I'll go first, Emma.
Fantastic.
Having a look at the questions. As far as the microgrid per se goes, I think we're going to need to look beyond maybe just the sort of single microgrid. We're going to need things like batteries, whether it's a community battery or individual batteries or batteries in each section to store the energy. We've started looking at other areas like biomass and hydrogen, generated electricity from places like the Lake Glenmaggie. Whether there's enough coming through or not is another matter, but I definitely think we have to look further than just a microgrid, having explored so far. It would be nice to have our own microgrid and rely on that only, but I really think we may have to look further. As far as the community organising itself and form a representative body, I think we're going to need people to step forward to begin with, and we're also going to need to rely on some outside agency to help us get started as a representative body for something like our own electricity company, you know, or something like this. What business, government agencies, research groups, other organisations haven't really, I mean, the businesses and the government agencies, I mean, we've got to look to AusNet. We're looking at, you know, Wattwatchers, UTS, some other electricity companies maybe who are branching out into solar and wind power, and also some of the private solar farms and wind farms that are being constructed around here too. We may need to be able to hook into them to provide our nighttime energy, or you know, energy during the day when we have little solar power. Yeah, I think that's about all I have to say at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, let's go up to my grid. Sorry, Julie's here with me, so we're watching together. Okay, I'm just looking to, I'm just trying to find out all my participants here. John, are you on the call?
Yes, yeah, I'm here.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, John. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, Murray, if on the back of Rosemary's point there, if we were, there's lots of solar projects going in. It's, I think it's 3 significant ones seeking approval or to start build shortly around Mafra and Heyfield. But off the back of one of your comments there before, the 6.6 kilowatts on a home is enough to make that home neutral on energy inputs. What if we were to use as much of the roof space as we could in Heyfield? How much of that would we be able to, and given the peak during the day of that solar, how would we harness that? So each person in the community has that option of, it's cheaper to put these panels on the roof rather than on assemblies on the ground and already own the sites. And then off the back of that, having it, so I've written in my notes, maxed up to supply the household, but also the local industry via a community retailer. What sort of technologies would we need to put in place as a community and enterprise? And also, how much, has there been any work done on how much we could generate off the rooftops in Heyfield?
John, some of the I mean, the monitoring data that's coming through now, and which we're using the Adept platform to aggregate the fleet of sites, and that, you know, already offers enough to show that, you know, for significant parts of the day, Heyfield is, you know, generating considerably more solar from those sites than they're using. We haven't sort of, you know, we haven't been able to get down to working out, you know, what's the number of additional solar you would need in Heyfield to be effectively net zero for electricity from generation in the locality. And that's definitely complicated by having a large industrial user in the shape of the timber facilities and that. But I think we've seen enough already to kind of indicate that that's not a, you know, that's not an unachievable objective, that just doubling down on solar and energy efficiency and being basically content that, you know, some of what you generate on your site flows out to neighbours or to the, you know, to industrial sites and that, and gets used, but effectively that's offsetting usage from the grid. So I think we've seen enough to know that that's already achievable. What, you know, part of the discussion really of sort of confronting the issue that a microgrid now, with boundaries that need to be set and infrastructure that would need to go with it, if that's not achievable, then, you know, part of the invitation really now is you've still got nearly a year and a half of the MyTown project to run, got some amazing experts, engineers and that working on it. So there is an opportunity to refocus on some of those sort of questions and put some of the modelling effort into other questions than microgrid boundaries.
Just noticed one of the chat comments come up there, Murray, about the mismatch of supply and demand, especially around just the PV, the solar. What can we do? I mean, Rosemary made the point before of batteries, but we have had discussions internally that the battery won't last, you know, won't sup up, you know, you need an awfully big investment in a battery to, you know, supply that demand when it needs to be. But you did raise a quick point there about energy efficiency. As a business owner myself and a home and so on, what would I need to invest in to be able to draw most of that off my solar? What sort of investment would I be looking at to shift that supply to my demand phase? I mean, it may be as simple as me, you know, I'm a dairy farmer, having a look at when I milk my cows to better match my supply. Yeah,
and look, you know, that goes to load shaping and load shifting. I think, you know, you've got these sort of basic tools which can be no regrets and low cost in terms of energy efficiency. So identifying any source of waste and inefficiency, including the kind of machines you run and that. Solar optimization, you know, where, you know, basically any loads that you can get under the solar curve are good value, and, you know, time of use and load shifting more broadly. But, you know, if that's a viable option that, you know, you could actually look at changing a dairy farm operation and time of milking and that. I'm no expert in it, and I can't say if it's, you know, even feasible, but, you know, that immediately in that particular scenario, the way, you know, a dairy farm operates, that then could, you know, very much justify a much bigger investment in solar. You know, there'd be real question marks, I think, about the economics of battery storage, considering the sort of size of the loads that seem to be involved there. Which comes back to the sort of argument, if you're still backed up by the grid, but you're maximising the renewables by getting the absolute most out of solar, that gets you significantly down the track to, and particularly in a community sense, to contributing to, you know, an overall net zero for electricity scenario without, you know, massive investment being required.
Okay. Does that answer some of your questions, John, for the time being?
Yeah, no, I've got plenty more, but yes, that was great. Thank you.
We love questions. Look, questions are great. Rosemary, you've got your finger up.
Yeah. What I'm also interested in is sort of the social outcomes for Heyfield as far as investment from the individual property owners is concerned, because we have got rental properties in Heyfield, and how, if we are going to either put solar on a whole lot more roofs or install batteries, I'm concerned that some people won't be able to afford it, often the renters, and a lot of property owners may not be willing to invest a certain amount. And this is a bit concerning. I don't know how we'd get around that, but it's something that I'm concerned about. There was something else I've temporarily forgotten, but never mind, I'll remember it soon. So.
Okay.
I mean, I think we've seen enough to know that, you know, it's a very complex question when you're looking at a community like Heyfield, which is quite diverse. You've got, you know, a very, quite a large industrial player there with big energy use. You've got sensitive sites like hospitals and emergency centres and those, you know, support centres and those kinds of things. So, you know, getting everybody to agree to a course of action, particularly if it involves significant costs that, you know, somebody has to pay for, it's a genuinely difficult proposition.
Yeah.
If you've got a simpler proposition like wanting to be net zero by 2025 or 2030, you know, then there are a lot more options which aren't necessarily, you know, that expensive. Like everybody, if you look at a retailer model, like a community retailer, everybody still needs to buy electricity, and that's, you know, a significant ongoing expense and revenue source. And that's something that people may well be attracted if there's a local option, which is a good price, and they, you know, can see something good happening in their community. You know, to me, that's likely to be an easier proposition to get people to sign up for than, you know, a massive investment in infrastructure, you know, batteries, or even buying the assets of the network or something. So it's, these are, we, you know, this was known, you know, before the project started, that these are, you know, it's a huge thing just to go off grid for your own house, and, you know, needs a lot of work. So to do it for a whole community is a big thing.
I'm going to bring Scott, Dr. Scott Dwyer, into this now. Scott, if you'd like to join the discussion, please, because there's some fairly major questions here, and obviously you're the lead researcher, so would have designed the study.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, it was Rosemary's good point there, and just building on what Murray said around the renters, and they're an important group in any context, and you have this issue with things like solar or in any form of energy efficiency upgrade or energy upgrade is this issue of split incentives. So if the landlord was to install solar, they don't actually get the benefits, the landlord's getting benefit. Or if the renter was to install it, they'll obviously they're not going to live there forever. So why would they do that? So this is something we are very conscious of, and this is one of the parts of the business model aspect as well, is with any technical option, how can we design it so that it's either going to encourage, be good for landlords, it's going to be offer benefits to those who are renters, and there's different options there which might be on the cards. For example, if say there is a solar farm, there's models out there, you know, community solar models, or if you've got a community battery, how could you have a share of that, and get some of the benefit in a, you know, a virtual way? Or are there shares, or there are cheaper tariffs which you could access whether you've got solar on your roof or not? So these are, there's different models out there which are being tried. We don't know what's right for Heyfield yet, but we want the benefit of MyTown Microgrid to be for everybody, not just those who own their own homes and have solar. And obviously, just probably a final point on that is MyTown Microgrid is very focused on Heyfield, but we also want to come up with a model that's replicable and scalable for other communities to follow. So whatever it is we're proposing, we really want to make sure that the benefits are spread as equally as possible, and nobody's really left out.
Okay, thank you for that, Scott. Right, John, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, Scott or Murray, are there any examples, you know, just thinking through this lower socioeconomic circumstances or rental landlord scenarios, are there any examples of homeowners or business owners leasing roof space for a period of time for PV solar installations?
Oh.
Not sure, Murray.
Don't rush.
I'm trying to wrap my brain. I mean,
there've been a number of sort of startups who do sort of models to try to help landlords invest in solar and manage it so the landlord and the tenants both visit. There's a number of sort of really challenging scenarios for solar, not all of which would particularly apply in Heyfield as a regional centre rather than the city. But, you know, strata communities are difficult, apartment buildings in general are difficult. There's always been this challenge of the split incentive for rental properties. But yeah, there are some models for that, and you know, on paper it kind of makes sense that a landlord could do it, make the investment. You know, there are other models that are, you know, trying to do, I guess, virtual solar, things like the Haystacks community solar farm model that the Community Power Agency, that is one of the partners in this project, is involved in, you know, where the solar panels are in a paddock out in the country, and you know, somebody who can't have a solar on their own roof can buy the electricity from that. There are, you know, all sorts of offset models for then larger power purchase agreements from wind farms and solar farms and that. You know, compared to even a few years ago, there's been a lot of work done on business models, service models, and that you know, I guess if they don't solve it, they provide clues to how some of these things can be solved.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I am conscious of the time, and I am going to stop sharing this screen now and actually bring the rest of the audience into the conversation, because I haven't managed to look at any of the questions or any of the chatters yet. So I'll just have a quick look. Sorry, well, I'll have to unblur it, but Julie's in the background here. Okay. So Ian,
You're coming in and out of blurriness.
yeah, I'll have to unblur Julie. Sorry, I'll have to. There's only so much I can do with whilst I'm having a quick
I
look.
thought it was just some CGI. You just sort of
Yeah. So
as a special effect.
okay, Ian, you've made a huge. You've got a very large comment there, which I'm hoping that everybody else has actually had a chance to read. Did you want to expand on that, Ian?
Yeah, hi.
Hello, Ian.
Yeah, just the point about the microgrid or any VPP or any other aggregated service. The outages are not that common. The percentage is probably 1%. So the rest of the time, the microgrid, VPP or amalgamated aggregated service is available to the grid to help with extra renewable penetration. And that's very, very important. And I think Andrew raised the point about looking at energy and storage and various other energy assets within the community that can assist in the after-hour period. And I really can't say any more than that. I mean, I accept what Murray said and agree with what Murray said, but we have a, you know, I guess we have an ability to look much further and hope that we can pick up some extra from the community as time goes by. Cheers, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ian. All right, a direct question here from, I believe it's Martin. Can you describe in more detail the benefits of a virtual microgrid? Have we answered that one yet? Not sure we have.
Look, certainly from my point of view, I guess the case that I'm making is, you know, go back 10 years, and I've, you know, been involved with the community energy movement from fairly on through various roles. You know, the motivator for many people, I won't say all, was a desire for, you know, zero emissions, for clean energy, 100% renewable, those sort of themes. And that was in the context of the grid appearing like nothing was going to change ever, and government wasn't acting and the industry wasn't acting. But the case I'm making now is that has been dramatically transformed. The transition is deep and powerful, and you know, it's a totally different scenario if the grid that you're concerned about, you know, will be 100% renewable within a few years or 10 years or so, in terms of the risk of investing in your own assets, in taking over infrastructure that may become stranded assets. It's just, you know, a highly risky environment. So the idea of sort of the virtual microgrid model, you know, and saying you can have the best of both worlds is you basically exploit the grid that's there and available, and you pick the things that you want to win on. So if you really want, you know, net zero for electricity or for your energy fast, then there are a set of things you can do around that, your own, you know, generation, solar and other things in the town, looking at, you know, power purchase agreements from wind farms or those sorts of things to cover what solar can't do. A community energy retailer type model, which might include a virtual power plant type model, which is really sort of orchestrating all of the small systems, small batteries, and you've got this behemoth coming through the electric vehicles, you know, and the disparity just in the battery size, vehicle batteries, electric car batteries are 6 to 10 times the size of the batteries that go on the wall in your garage, like a Tesla Powerwall. And, you know, there are going to be, you know, electric cars everywhere. There's going to be all of this capacity. So it's kind of an argument that now is the wrong time to make big commitments to own assets, but that you can piggyback on what's there and you can pick off the things that you really want for your community, and that, you know, the community itself really wants. So it's kind of, in some ways, it's a risk management structure, and it's in no way saying, oh, don't worry, don't do anything, it's all going to be fixed. I think there are fantastic opportunities for communities to be more engaged in their energy and to have real objectives and do things. It's just, don't do things that, you know, will cost a vast amount of money, which will make it very difficult to bring everybody on board. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, there's quite a bit of chatter around wind turbines from Amrita and Andrew, I believe it is. So your questions, and obviously Scott's been talking to you about them in terms of the size of, or I suppose accessibility of wind and size of wind turbines. Did you want to expand on any of that, or do you feel that your question's been answered? And you can just...
they're pretty much, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pardon, sorry?
Yeah, it's all been sort of resolved within the chat.
Wonderful, that's good, wonderful.
Chat's doing its work.
Wonderful, that's what we are, things that are resolved. Because obviously, certainly in the CRG, we talk a lot around obviously energy options, and solar being the certainly our most prevalent renewable, but we do talk about wind as well. And Scott, you're there saying that economically it's not viable to have a small turbine, like a small domestic turbine, if that's the gist.
Just like the bit, like for the, you know, there's economies of scale, so that's why you see them getting bigger and bigger and bigger for what, you know, offshore turbines, because they, you know, they make that much more economic sense. I know Andrew chipped in as well. It was a while since I did wind turbine physics when I was at uni. So yeah, Andrew had some some other good points there around, you know, you obviously want to get the good when you need to have a minimum wind speed, like there's a band of wind speed you want to get as well, which is, you know, a sweet spot. So there's so many considerations, and then a built, you know, for a building integrated version, there was some early work looking at that, but they kind of fell by the wayside a bit. But look, for Heyfield, I mean, again, we did a little early review of the wind speed maps around Heyfield, and you know, again, as part of our microgrid feasibility process for any community, along with any of the other resources available, you know, biomass, wind, geothermal, hydro, whatever it is, they would all be on the cards until you basically rule it out as saying, okay, there's not enough resource, or you know, it's not viable. So good to be considered, but I think in the case that's been discussed, probably not.
I think the other thing about offshore is there are no neighbours. I think I just heard on the news today there's been a court case in Victoria where it's actually the wind farm is now being restricted because of the court finding on noise complaints. Yeah.
The wind farm, I want to say Bald Hills, is that right? Yeah, in Tarwin Lower.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they've in their civil case, they've been found that they must pay damages there. So yeah, that obviously isn't an insignificant outcome. And
if you look at probably the most famous community example with wind towers, Hepburn Wind, you know, they did that more than 10 years ago. It may it may never be repeated in the same way. But, you know, they've created now a strong community around the energy transition, and they're doing all sorts of other things with solar, with community engagement, with EVs. So, you know, I think the sort of the implications I see are there. If you want clean energy from wind, you can, you know, buy it in a power purchase agreement or something. You don't necessarily have to go and build your own wind tower.
Thank you for that, Murray. Hopefully, Zoe, you're still on the call? Because Zoe is from Totally Renewable Phillip Island, and they are undergoing a neighbourhood battery initiative grant feasibility study. Did you want to talk about that at all, Zoe, in terms of storage? You're there? Zoe not there. Zoe gone. No, she is there. She's not, I can't hear her though. Can't hear you, Zoe. Oh, no, that's Ian. All right, no problem. Well, anyway, so there's some interesting things happening on Phillip Island in relation to the battery storage feasibility study. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, that's better.
Oh, you can. Sorry, I'm on a phone with a small child in the background, so it's all a little challenging.
No problem, Zoe. Thank you for that. Would you like to tell us a bit about your study?
Yeah, sure. So we were very fortunate to get 2 of the recent DELP grants for the Neighbourhood Battery Initiative. When was that? Last year. So one of them is looking at, there's a big battery coming to the island, a Mondo battery. They won the tender to install to help stabilise the grid. And as part of the NBI grant, we are looking at a compartmentalised portion of it that energy can directly be stored by community members, say off their own solar, off their rooftops. And that's predominantly looking around a tariff trail structure. So it's quite interesting because we're coming up against all of the issues of, you know, exporting and purchasing back in terms of which tariff structures are available without having to set up new ones, which is quite a lengthy regulation process. So that's interesting. The other one that we're possibly more advanced with is the idea of smaller batteries at neighbourhood levels on the low voltage lines. And we've had some very interesting data back just in the last 2 to 3 weeks on that. So we've been able to map, basically we're looking at quite a cross section. We're looking at some LV lines that are operating beyond capacity and some that are under, but we're also looking at the amount of solar customers and potential to absorb solar. So we're sort of looking at a notion of communities or smaller neighbourhoods that can actually store their personal solar in the battery at the low voltage line. But also I've recently put out a survey and we've had amazing results that I think about 89% of people who've come back would be very happy to share or donate their energy to others in the neighbourhood who don't have the capacity to access renewables. So that's quite exciting, but I won't go on further, but we are looking at this, and I put a little comment in the chats about even things like the bidirectional charging from electric vehicles, which is obviously a costly, it's costly for a householder, but then there are bulk buy options that we're looking at through people like the Good Car Co social enterprise in Tasmania. And also just simple things like storing energy in hot water systems. So having that heat up the water during the day. And my own background as an architect, I'm a passive house designer. So understanding that we could actually significantly reduce the operational needs of buildings and houses. So that mentality of efficiency first so that we don't need to produce and store as much. Anyway, I'll stop talking now.
So quick question for you, Zoe. So that's really interesting. So you're getting the battery, the neighbourhood battery, and are you doing another sort of concerted move in terms of helping people improve the energy efficiency or install solar Like, is that happening as well?
Yeah,
Or-
look, I mean, I think totally renewable Phillip Island is probably a little bit unusual in that our aim is carbon neutral by 2030, but we're doing this across 6 different working groups. So only one of those is clean energy. We've got a sort of communication and education wing. We've even got a regenerative carbon farming working group. So we sort of look at it across the whole needs of a community or a group, and then try and improve or make more efficient or make more sustainable all of the processes involved in that community. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Thank you, Zoe. That is really interesting, and I think RCRG would probably enjoy some more information around that at a future date. John, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Zoe a question. I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly, Zoe. The Mondo battery, did you say that you're negotiating with them to maintain virtual airspace, for lack of a better word, for community PV solar storage? Is that right?
Well, it's part of the Neighbourhood Battery Initiative grant through DELP that we will do a year's tariff trial. We're not sure what will happen after that year. I presume if it's a success, we'll then negotiate to maintain permanent or even increased capacity for community to store renewables in a grid connected battery that we don't actually own, which is quite an interesting proposition. But I think from a lot of the conversations earlier, and particularly what Murray was saying, we do sort of have this idea that we look at a lot of different options, and we look at the grid as a existing infrastructure that we can also utilise. And that notion then that potentially if we can generate enough solar off the island into this battery, we can then sell it off the island back to the mainland potentially. So there's a lot of interesting propositions, I guess.
Excellent. Thank you, Zoe.
Very, very interesting.
I think this, the question marks around storage are one of the most interesting and uncertain things in this. So some mix of big batteries and neighbourhood batteries, some mix of community-owned assets, some network-owned assets, and are an integral part of, the future grid operation. And then, you have the question of home batteries and electric vehicles with their big batteries coming through. And it just, people with much bigger brains than mine are wrestling with this stuff too. And it's, I think it's going to be partly sort of lived experience of what do people actually want, what do communities, actually want, what are they prepared to pay if they want to have more control of the assets, or are they happy to work with the energy system, work with the grid in, essentially different types of arrangements that could be enabled by new tariffs and those. So, we're all in what's essentially a big learning experience, and it just turned out that Australia, because of the huge uptake of rooftop solar and that here, by world standards, that we're kind of at the forefront of it. So there aren't a lot of blueprints.
Okay. Ooh, I'm conscious of time. Thank you for that, Murray. I'm conscious of time. We have 5 more minutes, so I will take 2 more questions, or if anybody wants to refer to anything that's been raised in the chat, we can expand on that more. Speak now. All gone quiet. All gone very, very quiet indeed. Oh, okay. I was quite interested, I have to say, in Amrita's question around a commercial microgrid selling back to the grid, or an entity like a microgrid selling back to the grid. Sorry. And Scott, you've talked about IKEA and Planet Arc Power doing this, and I didn't know that was what IKEA were doing. Is that the IKEA in Australia or elsewhere?
Yeah, there's an IKEA, I think it's in South Australia, where they've I'm not sure if it's been fully implemented yet, but the idea is that it's a commercial microgrid. So you've got the IKEA, standard IKEA warehouse, shop. You've got, they would have been limited by how much solar they can normally put on their roof, but because they've got a microgrid controller and they can do local supply demand balancing, they're able to have more solar basically. So one of they were looking at is providing grid services. So you get paid for providing grid services, whether it's switched on or off, basically. So that is one extra revenue stream. And I guess that's one of again, we'll be looking at when we do the modeling of the microgrid. Okay, so what are the gaps? Are there any other revenue streams you can get? I mean, even with your community battery, I think with that, I'm not super familiar with the terms of that community for the neighborhood battery scheme, but I understand that the network company, it's basically their asset, the community gets part of it, and the network uses some of that battery's capacity to provide its own services. So I guess where anything you've got that kind of storage employed, again, the mention of bidirectional electric vehicles, you start to open up the possibility where you start to have multiple of these, you can aggregate them together. And when you've got a certain amount, you can start to play into these markets and create extra value, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, I see John with his hand up, is that right?
Just something that Scott reminded me of talking about vehicles just now is, what happens when people go to work? I mean, the vehicle's parked up somewhere. Are we going to see more of a vision of car parks with solar panels over the top of them, and you park your car underneath and plug in while you're at work or at the shops, and at the same time you can elect that it can draw down 75% of your capacity if you want to sell a bit, or what does it look like?
The vehicle to grid scenario, but there are going to be some people who are driving in their cars all day, and there's some people who are going to be parked most of the day. So I guess the school's a good example. Drive to work, park the car, it's sitting there through the highest sort of solar part of the day when there'll be massive amounts of low or zero cost electricity available. Those sort of vehicles, you'll want to incentivize them to get charged during the day and then go home, and instead of trying to charge, discharge into the evening peak when there's lots of electricity demand and the solar's already gone off because the sun's gone down or is going down. So that's the kind of fine tuning of the energy system that will be absolutely needed, because electric vehicles are going to double the amount of electricity required, or even more. So the need to sort of manage consumption and generation and charging and that all in an orchestrated way, that is the essence of the challenge of this energy transition.
Yeah, I was speaking with it was a good question, John, and building on what Murray said, that we were speaking with an Australian company that makes electric vehicle chargers, bi-directional ones, which are still still being developed and brought into the country and passing all the different standards. And they make all sorts of electrical equipment, and they actually make the charging cells that will go in other people's charging equipment. So they've been asked about this by car manufacturers in Europe and elsewhere, and he reckoned that it's the standards will come. They're expensive now, but even though they're not that much more complicated, the prices will come down as you start to get more of them. But it's how customers will react, how people will react, how you will want to charge, whether you'll want to give up control of your battery in your vehicle to be charged and discharged, and also the business model there as well. It's like, how will who will do that, how will they make money, who will be in charge of managing it and taking all the different risks. So some trials going on in Australia, many more going on around the world. They're kind of ramping up, so you'll see some interesting activity, and it's something that when we're looking at MyTown Microgrid, we're saying we're not just looking at how much solar is installed now and how much biomass might the mill have now. It's okay, well, what about the next 10, 15, 20 years? And in that time when EVs cost the same as or less than a petrol vehicle, when you can buy electric utes and delivery vans and buses, it will be quite a different picture. So we have to make sure we factor this in to the future picture.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. So I'm going to end our webinar there. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you for your questions and for your comments. Murray, I loved your presentation. It had so much information, so much thought-provoking content in it. I'm very grateful that I've had the opportunity to listen to that. Thank you very much to Rosemary, John and Scott, and for everybody else attending this evening. As I said, there will be a recording of the webinar. That'll be available on our webpage. So in the next few days, along with Murray's presentation, it'll be shared as well. If you are from the area and you are interested in joining our community reference group, they're a fantastic bunch. They are highly committed to community energy and have exceedingly thought-provoking discussions. Then please obviously email info@mytownmicrogrid.com.au. You can subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on social media. Coming up, we will be having a town hall towards the middle of the year. And hopefully before then, we'll have our community dashboard display. So you will get the opportunity to view more of the data that's coming from the Wattwatchers monitors that are installed in Heyfield. Okay, so I'd just like to end it on there. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and we will see you again soon, hopefully for another webinar. All right, thanks now. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.